This podcast is brought to you in partnership with EVA International Media Limited. Hello and welcome to Down to Earth with Terry Virts, where we talk about what matters down here on planet Earth. And today we're really lucky to have a very cool and very unique guest, Robin Horsfall. Robin is a former British soldier in the SAS, followed by a long career in private security. He's a black belt in karate and is currently an author, motivational speaker, cancer survivor, in addition to being a husband, father, grandfather, and great-grandfather. And we're going to talk about his amazing career and also a little bit about what the boys in Ukraine are experiencing on the ground. So, Mr. Horsfall, thank you so much for joining the podcast today.
Well, it's great to be here, Terry. Thanks for having me.
So we met on, I guess, on LinkedIn, and I've seen a lot of your social media posts. They're really great. They're full of lots of wisdom, some great advice, and some really profound insights I have found. So we kind of got met each other that way. And as I looked in your story, like your origin story, if you will, your background is really fascinating. Can we just talk through that a little bit?
Sure. I was born in 1957, which is only 12 years after the end of the Second World War, which to young people today will seem like 100 years ago. And I didn't know my father because he was in prison. And my mother divorced him when I was 7 years old. And that lack of a male role model and a father in those first 7 years was a big problem that led into which really affected my childhood and youth. And so I was a pretty smart kid. I did well at school until my mother's second marriage fell apart. And so at the age of 14, I volunteered to join the British Armed Forces, and the school leaving age in the UK at that time was 15. So a year later, I joined up as what's called a junior soldier. And for the next 2 years, it was like a military college, but not for officers, for non-commissioned officers. And I spent 2.25 years there before I went to the parachute regiment at 17 and to the SAS at 21. And I left the British Army when I was 27, and I was a mercenary and a bodyguard. And until eventually my wife put her foot down and said, "I've had enough of this, and if you do that again, I won't be here when you come home." Right. I've just come back from 15 months at war in Mozambique. And she was right. I had some anger management issues at that time, which we can discuss further. And then I settled down and eventually ended up teaching children martial arts for 25 years and built one of the biggest martial arts organizations for children in Europe. And then I broke my neck training with my oldest son, Alex. And so I had to change a life. At 53, I went to university and studied creative writing with English literature. And 3 years later, graduated at the age of 59. Nobody wants to sit next to their grandpa at school. I went to live in Prague for 5 years, and I've written published 5 books now. My life story, Fighting Scared, and the Wise Old Paratrooper trilogy, and recently a book of illustrated poems. And I live in South Wales in the mountains, which is lovely and quiet, with my wife. I've got 5 kids, 10 grandchildren, and 4 great-grandchildren. And wow. That encapsulates my life story in a nutshell. So I can go now.
Yeah, it was great having you on the podcast. There's so many questions I want to talk about. First of all, you're in Wales, and there's a TV series called Wrexham. You may have heard of it.
I have. I've heard of it. I've never watched it, but I've heard of it. Yeah.
It's very charming. You get a lot of sense of what Wales is like, and of course the 2 American movie stars are by the football club, and I'm like captivated. I love it. I love Ted Lasso. These stories of Americans going and learning about British football it's really funny.
One of the most wonderful things about Wales is that, I live in the valleys, which is away from the cities, and you still have a community where everybody knows everybody else. So if somebody stole your bicycle, somebody would call you and say, "Oh, young Pete up the road, he's got your bike, I'll send it down. It's that kind of place where everybody
Right.
knows everything about everybody, and
Right.
everybody knows their neighbors and talks to them. And at
Right.
night you can see the stars,
Right.
and the only thing you hear after 10 o'clock at night is the occasional bark of a dog.
Right.
So it's a beautiful place, and you get real characters. So I imagine the program, because I haven't seen it, but the characters you get in the countryside, especially in Wales, are just amazing. They're hilarious, they're direct, they're funny, they're strong. It's a wonderful place to be.
I love that. I'm really so anyway, you've now my brain is spinning with ideas. I'd like to film something there, but we'll have to talk later. Your story about becoming an author sounds familiar to me. When I was in high school, I was probably the least likely to write a book. I was a terrible English student. Some friends of mine, I just got this really funny link this morning about Shakespearean insults and how he has the best insult without using cuss words. He just has the best insults of all time. And I could not understand a word of Shakespeare when I was a kid. I got very bad grades in English. And now in my 50s, I've written several books. I've got a kid's book coming out in 2 months. And I kind of feel like I've taken your path to where I did this thing, and then all of a sudden I'm into writing later in life. I love it. I love it.
Yeah, I mean, Shakespeare frightens people, because the thing about Shakespeare, it's plays. It's meant to be performed and watched.
Right.
It's not meant to be read.
Right.
So when you read it, you lose the nuance, you lose the sense, and the language loses you.
Right.
So I avoided it in the first year I was at university, and then I got into it.
Oh, really?
And I just adore it. It is so deep. It is so understanding of human nature and human characters, and all the same failings and emotions that existed 500 years ago still exist today.
It's the same thing. Go back to the Bible 2,000 years ago. It's the same problems. There's probably Egyptian hieroglyphs that you could read the Taming of the Shrew in the Egyptian hieroglyphs, I'm sure, from 5,000 years ago.
That same men are from Mars, women are from Venus thing. It's always been there.
It's always been there.
Never been
Always
any
will.
different.
Yeah.
Part of the joy of life. Vive la différence,
Vive la différence.
Yeah.
So you mentioned SAS, and I asked you, but there's a TV show out. I was just in Europe, and I was trying to find one channel, and they had the wrong channel on, and it was I don't even know. It was some British. It might have been BBC or another British channel. Rogue Heroes, about the origin of the SAS, and it's probably all BS. Is that true, or?
It's good entertainment.
Yeah.
So if you want to watch it for the entertainment value, go ahead. It's great fun. Enjoy it. But don't ever think that it's in any way related to reality. It's a pure fiction. I watched the first two, and I quite enjoyed the first one. And by the time I'd watched the second one, having been an SAS soldier, I started to lose interest, because what they'd lost in the program was the class difference that dramatically existed between the officers and the men in the 1940s and right up till the 1980s, where you could tell who was an officer simply by his accent. And and David Sterling, who I met several times during my time in the service, who was one of the founders of the Special Ed, he never swore. He came from that aristocratic landed gentry from Scotland, and he would have been appalled to see himself portrayed as somebody that used the F word. I mean, it's just appalling. I mean, he would be distraught to see that. Right. So those kind of failings, and there were a lot of technical errors in the program, but for fun, for entertainment, to enjoy a story, go ahead. But don't believe it's any way related to the truth or the real characters.
There's a famous quote from General Washington, our George Washington. He's probably not the most popular guy in Britain, but
he's one of the greatest Englishmen that ever lived.
He really was. And there's a quote about him telling his officers that the general is sorry to be informed that the officers have embraced the foolish and wicked practice of profane cursing and swearing, a vice heretofore little known in Continental Army. Anyway, so officers were not the way they are today, maybe. So when you joined in the 70s, there was very much, I mean, there's still class distinction, but it was, I guess it was much more back then.
Yeah, much less so today. I mean, I have occasional dinners with serving officers in the
Right.
British Army still,
Right.
and you couldn't tell which school they'd been to or which class culture they came from
Right.
anymore today. We all speak very much with the same vernacular, but back in the 70s, the lads on the street would have been all like that, like geezers,
Right.
and
The East
the officers
London,
would have been
Liverpool.
rather clipped and very much upper class. You would have been able to tell straight away that they were
Right.
officers.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It was there. And the Americans cannot do an English upper class accent. No matter how hard Tony Curtis tried, he could never do it. You have to be there.
Brits, it's amazing. So I'm really fascinated by Hollywood and writing screenplays and stuff. British actors can do American accents unbelievably. Damon, the guy from Band of Brothers. I was in England a few years ago and I saw this play.
Damon Lewis. Yeah.
Damon Lewis. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It was the worst play I've ever seen. It was about a goat, this man that falls in love with a goat. It was terrible. He was the main actor. And afterwards, I asked my British friends, I was like, why did you get an American to act in this play? Aren't there enough British actors to act in it? And they were like, what are you on about? That he's a Brit. I'm like, no, he's not. He's in Billions. He's in he's American. He's British. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah,
The
I mean,
accent.
when he played Major Winter,
Yeah.
he had that Maine accent down to a T. I heard Winter speaking on interviews before he died,
Yeah.
and you could hear the same accent. I mean, he obviously went to a teacher who worked on those phonetics for some time, and it's absolutely awesome. When that's a real actor, it's not somebody learning lines and standing up and doing something. Somebody really gets into it
He's
and can
becoming the
change.
character. Yeah.
I mean, you've got one of my favorite American stars is Tom Hanks,
Yeah.
who's exactly the same. A real actor, he can be anything you want him to be.
Yeah.
Amazing.
It's a skill that I don't have and I really admire. There's a reason why there's not a lot of stars. I mean, stars they're very, very talented guys like that. But so SAS, what Special Air Service, what is that? For the American for the Americans.
The Special Air Service Regiment was formed in the Second World War to do behind the lines raids on enemy airfields in North Africa, and gained a great reputation for that kind of operation until it was disbanded in 1946. But then it was reformed during the Malayan emergency in the 1950s, and gradually grew and became, but it was very much a reconnaissance and raiding group, very small, very distinct. Fred Carnot's army in Darkest Herefordshire in the west of England, nobody knew about it, nobody heard about it, and didn't hear about it until our famous raid in London in 1980, when we rescued 19 hostages from the Iranian embassy and killed 5 terrorists and captured 1, an operation that I was part of. And after that, we became a myth. Whereas before that, we were just a regular part of the British Army who did occasional special secret things, but it's not a secret service. And we've been involved in operations behind enemy lines, undercover, counterterrorism, hostage rescue for the last generation. That famous raid took place 10 days after the failed operation into Iraq by Delta. And sadly, where a lot of guys died through accidents. And only 10 days later, so the world was very much the morale of the world was extremely low at that time, and our raid lifted everybody, and people started to go, "Oh my God, at least we can do something about these people."
Right.
And so for 25 years, we never spoke about that.
Wow.
We were the most famous anonymous people in the world.
And now it's still an ongoing part of the British military.
Yeah, it's a regular part of the British military. As I say, it's very important for people to understand it's not the Secret Service. During the troubles we had for 30 years in Northern Ireland, where the SAS were working undercover in Northern Ireland against several terrorist groups, we had to keep our identity secret, because we would be attacked at home. Our families and our children would be attacked at home. So it was very important then, but that threat has passed. And so some people like to still maintain the myth that you have to be anonymous and have a brick across your face in your photographs and things like
Right.
that. You know, that's I think it's people playing to the public.
Right.
Yeah.
So the Northern Ireland thing, the reality is Americans just don't know, they don't understand, they don't remember, they vaguely remember Sinn Féin and the IRA. Can you talk us through that? Because that sounded like that was one of the first things you did as a lad, right? You were a young lad when you went over there. Yeah.
I did my first tour in Northern Ireland as soon as I joined my battalion, as soon as I was 18 years old.
Wow.
So I was on the streets of Belfast, and at a time when, you know, I think in the first year we were there, the security forces lost 270 men killed.
Holy cow.
Yeah.
So wow, it's not just England, right? It's England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland.
It's complicated because Britain is classed as Scotland, Wales, and England, and the United Kingdom is Scotland, Wales, England, and Northern Ireland.
Right.
And Northern Ireland was formed after an agreement in the early 20th century between the Irish and the British. What they did is they left a small part in the north of Ireland for the Protestant community that wanted to remain under British rule, and the rest of Ireland became the Republic of Ireland, or ERA. An awful lot of people around the world, not just in the USA, still think that Ireland is part of Great Britain. It isn't. It hasn't been for over 100 years. So Ireland's been a free democratic republic.
Right.
I think for a long, long time.
They're in the EU. It's their own thing. They have their own currency. Is that right?
They're in the euro.
Yeah.
The euro.
Yeah.
So
they have really good beer.
Well, the Irish know how to make music and how to party. They can be the most amazing people, but they also love to fight.
Yeah.
We went. The British Army was deployed in Northern Ireland in 1969 to stand between the Protestant and Catholic communities that were about to erupt into civil war and kill each other. And like anybody that gets involved in a domestic dispute, both sides tend to turn inwards upon you, standing in the middle. And that's where the soldier was for 30 years. There was an awful lot of bad politics that went with it over that period of time. But over that period of time, there were over 50,000 casualties in Northern Ireland over that 30 years. As I say, with
50,000. Northern Ireland is small. It's like
it's a tiny little province, tiny little province, but with two communities that feared and hated each other to the point where they were prepared to die and blow people up in pubs and schools, it is a very, very complicated story. But I recommend that people read about it before they form opinions.
Yeah.
There are an awful lot of stories that have spread around the world that and people form their basis of their opinions and beliefs on that. Read about it. I read about the Republican cause when I was an 18-year-old soldier, and I came to understand an awful lot more about the reasons why I was there, and the history of Northern Ireland and why the conflict is there. It goes back 500 years.
Republican being Ireland Catholic. Being a separate country.
No, the Republicans in Northern Ireland, you have two communities, the Protestant and Catholic. Right. And the Catholics are people who want a united Ireland. They want Northern Ireland to become part of the South and part of that free democratic republic of ERA. And so they were campaigning for that. The Protestant community, or loyalist or unionist community, they want to remain part of the British, the United Kingdom under the rule of Britain. So there's the real divide. But it started in the 1960s with Catholics marching for civil rights because they were being denied their civil rights by the Protestant-dominated government of Northern Ireland.
Right.
And an awful lot of support was given to them by the Protestant part of the community as well. But it became such a big political issue, power brokering game, that eventually it collapsed into pretty much open warfare, which is very, very sad.
And so the IRA were the fighting part of the I guess the Catholics in Northern Ireland, and the Sinn Féin was the political part of them.
Well, yeah, Sinn Féin was
Political
formed
wing.
from the official IRA,
Right.
which was a group that actually decided they want to work through politics rather than the gun.
Right. Right. Right.
But in the early 1970s, the British government, in response to the violence there, brought in internment and imprisonment without trial. And that created so much anger
Right.
that people formed the provisional IRA,
Right.
and the provisionals decided to run with the gun and the bomb and the bullets,
Ugh.
and became the people that carried out, I would say, 60% of the terrorist activities of Northern Ireland over the next 30 years. They bombed London, they bombed women and children in pubs in Glasgow, in Scotland, in Birmingham, in England, in London, and Manchester.
Right.
Did some terrible, terrible things. I mean, politics, you take the politics and you can sympathize, but you cannot sympathize with people that commit murder
Yeah,
carry
absolutely. They killed one of the royals, right? One of the royal. Yeah.
They killed Lord Mountbatten on the same day that they killed 22 men of my regiment as well, with bombings at Warren Point. Yeah.
So you're an 18-year-old boy with a gun.
I'm an 18-year-old young man.
Well, that's young.
As far as I'm
concerned,
the day I joined the army at 15, I was a young man. I was never a boy after that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You had to grow up pretty quickly.
I think I'd already grown up.
You'd already grown up.
But I had to grow up even faster once I got there.
Yeah. That's amazing. And it's your own countrymen. It's not like you're in Afghanistan where it's obvious who's British and who's not. It's what an experience. And you went back several times, right, for that?
Yeah, I did 5 tours of Northern Ireland, 3 with the Parachute Regiment and 2 with the Special Air Service, and I enjoyed them. I enjoyed being a soldier. It was never a great trial to do the job.
Right.
It was what I'd been trained for from the age of 15.
Right.
And I was good at it.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, people would sit in awe of you being an astronaut. But to you, I have done all this training. I know what I'm doing.
Right.
I know how to make this situation as safe as possible.
Right.
Not as scary for you to do it as it would be for me.
Yeah. No, that's it. I'm just amazed at the age you were when you went over there. Like when you think of young people today that have, you had to grow up pretty quick. That's an amazing, amazing story.
We as adults are to blame if we think that the young people in our communities aren't growing up.
Right.
It's because we train them to be children.
Right.
We don't let them grow up. We don't send them to the shops.
Right.
Go walk to the shops, buy some bread.
Yeah.
Go out on your own and play without supervision.
Right.
Be free. I mean, I was a feral kid. I mean, I disappeared on a Friday night and came back on a Sunday evening.
Yeah.
With my friends, and we went fishing at the local ponds and things like that, which kids used to do in the 1940s and 50s in the USA as well.
I did it in the 70s. Yeah. I was very lucky. My parents let me do stuff on my own, and that like self motivation is, I think, what let me do all the things that I got to do later in life.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've got laws in the United Kingdom now that say you're technically a child. I think you call it a minor, until you're 18 years of age.
Yeah.
Well, what you're doing is you're saying, you're not responsible for yourself until you're 18, and then suddenly we want you to be a grown-up. Right. Well, me, I'm all. I mean, with my kids, I mean, I was all for making them responsible for various things at different stages as soon as they could possibly be responsible.
Right.
Even if it was just go and clean the room or learn how to use the washing machine.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Get to town on your own, catch the bus.
Yeah. I love it. So you had these deployments to Ireland, but you also had the Falklands. So I think there's two things in my mind anyway that were very formative for the British Army and worldview of what were Northern Ireland and the Falklands. And those are two things that America did not experience at all. So as we kind of went together into Iraq and Afghanistan in the 2000s, you guys had Northern Ireland and the Falklands as your formative thing. We had Vietnam, anyway. Yeah,
that's right. You did.
The
veterans from Vietnam in the 5 or 6 years afterwards would have been the core of any operations that actually took place with that experience.
Right.
And my experience was 5 tours of Northern Ireland, the Falklands War, the Iranian embassy. But so in the 12 years I was with the British Army, those were the formative times. The Falklands, my mission there was to go into Argentina to destroy the superétendard jets on the ground that were sinking our capital ships, and then get killed or captured, where there was no home trip because there was no fuel for a home trip. So we were going to land on this runway in Ushuaia or Rio Grande and destroy the jets and come home. And my wife was 8 months pregnant. And off we went to do the mission. But Ronald Reagan put pressure on Margaret Thatcher not to extend the war on the mainland, because the war on the mainland, or the war in the islands, was going so well. And so the mission was initially postponed, and then, praise be to God, cancelled. But we got on the aircraft to do it.
I was in Ushuaia a couple years ago, and there's a giant sign on a side of a building that says Malvinas Argentinas.
So
Anyway,
you were big arrow saying that way.
Wow, were you going to parachute in and then have a boat?
No, we were going to land two C-130 transport aircraft on the runway.
Yeah.
Drive off the back with vehicles of mounted machine guns, all 70 of us.
Right.
And find these jets on this on the runway, because the Argentinians were not fools. They were moving them. So
right.
They weren't in a predictable place. We're moving them between 3 different airports. And then once we'd managed to destroy the jets, really the only sensible thing to do at that point would have been to surrender and hope to come home after the war. As it was, it didn't happen. The reconnaissance team got compromised and flew to the Chilean border and got picked up on the other side of the Chilean border. Our mission actually got cancelled. So we got down there, but only a few days before the surrender. But the job, I mean, the Falkland Islands is the cold, wet. There's no trees.
Right.
It's a damp and miserable place, even in the summer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They filmed their movie called The Revenant. Leonardo DiCaprio. Yeah. Won the Academy Award. And I'm friends with the filmmaker, is a guy named Chivo Lubeski. And before I went down there, he was telling me about they have condors, these condors with giant, like 3-meter wingspans. And they filmed the final scene of The Revenant there because it got summer in Canada and the snow was melting. So they had to go down to Ushuaia. It's a cold place, to say for sure.
Yeah. Land of fire.
Yeah. Tierra del Fuego. Yeah. It's I love that film. I thought the scenes with the bears were amazing. Yeah, and it's a great story based on a true story. It's I love stories that are close to the true story as well, rather than just loosely based. And it was a great story, a great film. Really well done. It was amazingly shot. And I'm reading Jack London right now, some of his old stories. Jack London is kind of funny. It's the same thing. It's like these guys get together and they decide to go out on the trail, and then they're freezing, and the dogs know better than the men do, and it's kind of like the same story over and over and over and over. But
who was it? Somebody, I don't remember who said there are only 5. I think it was the ancient Greeks. There are only 5 real stories.
That's right. Yeah.
I won't list them because I'll get them wrong.
I forgot what they are too, but you're right. There's like a few basic stories and
quest, love, tragedy, and so on. Yeah.
Comedy. Yeah. So you had this experience in the Army. I assume that you said you were an NCO. Is that right?
Yeah. I was a full corporal in the SAS when I left in 1984. And then I went on to be in some foreign armies. Look after some of the rich and famous, and more importantly, the powerful in the world.
I saw Dodi Fayed, Sheikh Mohammed. Sheikh Mohammed's the guy that ran the UAE. His pictures everywhere in Dubai nowadays. And Abu Dhabi.
With Dodi, I mean, I was looking after his father, Mohammed Al Fayed, And Dodie used to visit London occasionally after he was the executive producer for Chariots of Fire, a great film. And so he's the same age as me. So we got on quite well, and he would go around the London nightclubs with Michelle Pfeiffer and Koo Stark and people like that. And I would just be the guy sat in the corner, keeping a general eye on things. With Rafiq Hariri, he was going to become the Prime Minister of Lebanon. And there was a war. The war was on full scale in Beirut at that time. And we weren't living in Beirut. We were visiting occasionally, but mostly through Damascus. Babylon was burning in one place or another.
Right.
And he had a genuine threat. So it was one of the most high-powered private jobs with a genuine threat to life that existed at that time. And I stayed with him for 2 years. But my wife got ill in pregnancy, and I went home. And he got blown up by the Syrian Secret Service in Beirut after becoming Prime Minister, very sadly, because he was a moderate and a good man for his people.
Right.
It's a shame. Yeah. When I went home, I ended up working for an American called Albert Dunlap, whose nickname was the Chainsaw. And he used to do aggressive takeovers of companies and fire all the staff and sell up the profits. And people genuinely wanted to kill him too. After 4 weeks of working for him, I wanted to kill him too. He's the most evil human being I've ever encountered in my entire life. So as soon as my son was born, we parted company on bad terms. Yeah.
There's a picture, I think, on your website of him, and he looks like an evil human being. I think, is that the right? Yeah.
That's the one. And the Americans voted him the worst boss in the world. He brought down Chrysler. I think he was convicted. I don't know whether he went to prison. He was convicted of corporate fraud as well. Yeah.
So are you allowed to carry weapons as a civilian in England? And
not in the United Kingdom. No, nobody is allowed to carry weapons in the United Kingdom. Even the Secret Service, when they visit with the US president, have to have special dispensation to carry their weapons in the United Kingdom. And they get it, of course, they get it. But no. So, you're working in an environment in the UK where you're protecting people without weapons. But, we don't have the distribution of weapons in our country that you have in yours, So it's the biggest threat to a client, a private client, is usually going to be somebody pestering them or bothering them rather than trying to kill them. If somebody's under life threat in the United Kingdom, the chances are they're going to have police protection, and those policemen are going to be armed.
Right.
But even now, the average daily policeman doesn't carry a weapon. He doesn't carry a gun.
Right.
He carries a taser, but he doesn't carry a gun. But when we went abroad, when I was traveling around the world, we were visiting George Shultz in Washington, D.C., trying to get French hostages released from Hezbollah, and visiting regularly. And when we landed in the USA, we could carry. When we were in France, we could carry. When we were in Italy, we could carry. But when we were in the United Kingdom, we couldn't.
You couldn't carry.
Yeah.
So that's a unique experience that very few people have, being a bodyguard. And I guess your goal is to not be seen, like the person should be able to conduct his business. And you remember the Whitney Houston film, Kevin Costner, The Bodyguard? One of them. I watched that film expecting the worst, and I was immediately impressed when she looks at Costner and says, "My God, you don't look like a bodyguard." That's so true, because bodyguards don't look like bodyguards. It's not their job to be a big man who beats people up. It's their job to get the client and run away. Right.
You saw one of the most efficient actions of a professional bodyguard was when you saw Reagan get shot.
Yeah.
And before his knees could buckle, the bodyguard had him through the back door of the car, on the back seat of the car, laying on top of him. The car went, oh, that was close protection, and it's very, very highest standards.
Right.
The bodyguard, there's only usually one bodyguard in the team. He's the person standing next to the client or within a very short step of the client. As you say, he's a grey man. He's wearing a dark suit. He fits in well with everybody else. He's not ostentatious or big or glaring. And hidden around him are various concentric circles of protection, the cordon teams. And they can be close or they can be far out and extend as far out as the buildings surrounding something when you look at presidential security. And those people are very, very, very good. But the bodyguard's job is to grab the client and run.
Right.
Not necessarily
not get into a gunfight.
Weapon, not to fight back.
Right.
The other parts of the team are there to do that. His job is to run away.
Right.
Yeah.
That's
with the client.
Yeah, not just turn and run. Forget your client.
Yeah.
You won't get a Christmas bonus that year if you do that, probably.
Yeah, that's right.
So there's another thing that, based on all these experiences you've had, this is especially in the Army, we have this war in Ukraine, and clearly you're passionate about it. Clearly you think that Ukraine can win and should win. When I see some of the machinations of these European politicians, it just makes my head explode. It's interesting that the Poland, the Baltics, the Eastern Europeans are very much pro-Ukraine because they know what it's like to live under the boot of tyranny.
Yeah.
And France, Germany, the UK has been very supportive, but a lot of the Western European countries are like, well, we need to make sure we don't escalate, and we have to be careful with Putin, and we need to make sure we take care of Putin, and blah blah blah. And,
well, the thing is, we've got a huge amalgamation of democracies.
Yeah.
And because we have that freedom, we have our democracies. Each government in each country has to persuade its people that they should do this for these reasons. And and you're absolutely right about the Baltic states and Poland, that and the Czech Republic as well, and Slovakia. They remember what it's like to be invaded. Hungary should, but doesn't.
Hungary, they have a bad leader.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you've got a mini Putin in there at the moment, they've got to persuade, and everybody expects things to happen within 24 hours.
Yeah.
Oh, the Germans aren't going to send their tanks. That's terrible, and we're all going to create hell about it. I think the Germans have, some, looking back in hindsight, some things they should have done differently, but they still have to persuade their people that it's the right thing to do to send their Leopard tanks into Ukraine. And a few days later, they came to that agreement with some pressure from Joe Biden, with some pressure from Rishi Sunak and other people, and the French the same. But sometimes the people in a country think it's because somebody's the president or because somebody's the prime minister, they can just say, yeah, we're going to do that and get on with it. No, they can't. It's very, very difficult to get a country to spend hundreds of millions of pounds of its money to support a neighbor that's been invaded. You have to get the agreement of your people and your government and your population. And that's why they're called democracies. So it takes us a while to get into it. And I think it's taken 11 months. But this last 2 weeks, we've seen really strong, firm movements from everybody, which is basically putting the stamp on the ground and saying to the Vladimir Putin, we're not going to stop supporting these people. Right. You are going to lose this war. Right. We've got 140 trillion in our economies, and you've got 1.8. You're going to lose, and we're going to stay in the fight. And all the time we do that, Ukraine will win. The second we start arguing amongst ourselves and saying, I gave more than you, and you didn't do your bit, and your tanks aren't as good as mine, and why haven't yours turned up? That's when it all starts to fall to pieces. So we've got to be very, very careful of not arguing amongst ourselves and making sure we stay united as allies and support Ukraine, because they were invaded for no good reason.
Oh, yeah. If Russia were a state in America, I think it would be the 4th biggest state in terms of economy. They're like, they're less than Texas. I live in Texas. They're the one below Texas, I think, or Florida maybe, or something.
That's right. It's been a paper tiger for a long time.
Yeah. But
there's the big bully standing up and doing an awful lot of shouting, an awful lot of ranting, and hoping that the propaganda will make a difference. But the hidden agenda, the hidden power is in the economy as well. I mean, because who was it? Your famous senator who died, John McCain. John McCain said, Russia is just a gas station outside Europe. And he's absolutely right, because without that, they've got absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
And we're cutting that
Unfortunate.
off.
Unfortunate for the Russian people. They should be much better than they are, but they have these kleptocrats, dictators as leaders.
Yeah.
And so I really hope this is a time when Europe opens its eyes. Germany has been, I think, Gerhard Schroeder is the chairman of the board of Nord Stream. I mean, the amount of anyway, I hope they open their eyes. It's like when like Churchill, in World War II, he said we're going to fight, and there were lots of people in the UK, maybe a few in the royal family, half of America, a lot of the world did not want to fight Hitler. We were not ready, and Churchill said, no, we're going to fight him. We're going to fight on the beaches, and we're going to, he gave that famous speech.
Yeah.
And it took a strong leader like that. And now when we look back, obviously we're going to fight Hitler. Obviously we're going to beat him. Now it's obvious. But at the time, there were lots and lots of people who did not want to stand up to tyranny. And I hope we're having that moment now.
Yeah. I mean, there was a vote of no confidence proposed in him, and they were going to try to put Lord Halifax in as the prime minister. And Halifax wanted a negotiated settlement with Hitler. But the lessons of history are always there.
Right.
You cannot. I mean, the British, the Saxons paid Danegeld, which is ransom to the Vikings, and for generations. But eventually, the Vikings just came and killed them anyway. You don't. You can only negotiate with bullies and tyrants from a position of strength.
Yeah.
And now it's Russia that's starting to want to talk.
Yeah.
But at the moment, they only want to talk to create deception, to create a pause, to create a moment of rest and respite for them. Ukrainians know the Russians better than anybody. Absolutely. And they're not being fooled for a moment. What's important is the Western democracies don't get fooled either. And I write on LinkedIn almost every day, not always about Ukraine, but predominantly about Ukraine.
Right.
Because, and I write there because it's one place I can speak openly without editorial control, without political control, without somebody saying, oh, yeah, it's a great story, Rob, but we're not going to put it in the papers because it might upset the wrong people. Right. I can do that. I have to be very careful how I couch my words, because, the Russian troll farms are beyond me as soon as I made a mistake. And they could, and they do. I've had to put up several appeals to get my account, to get my words back on the screen. And then I share it on Twitter, and I share it on Facebook and so on. But the message gets out there, and I get maybe 1.5 million people see my stuff every day. No, I'm exaggerating, every week.
Yeah.
And that's nice to feel that you have a voice.
Yeah.
And I get a huge amount of support from Ukrainian people because they feel that there's somebody saying it as it really is, and not just getting sound bites for the TV. We've got to get this in 20 seconds. Right. And there's no real substance, and sometimes it's speculation or the sort of inflammatory language that frightens the people, which we don't want either.
Right. Now, your posts on LinkedIn are really great. By the way, it's Robin, Robin, Horsfall, Horsfall.
There's no way. There's no E in Horsfall.
Right. Yeah. Or T. It's not Horsfall. So if people want to follow you on LinkedIn.
And an easy way for people to remember is donkey and drop.
Is what?
Donkey drop.
Okay. There you go. Donkey drop. I got it. I like it.
Donkey drop. My youngest son started a theater company in Prague, and he called it Donkey Drop, was a play on our name.
I love it. That is amazing. So I'm an Air Force guy. I just had General Phil Breedlove on the podcast, we were F-16 guys together back in the day. He's about 10 years older than me, and he ended up being the NATO commander. It was a great episode. You would enjoy it. It really, really good. But we're Air Force guys, and I always tell this joke, and you've probably seen it. There's a poster of like all these different soldiers, and there's like this Army guy, and he's wet and miserable holding a gun, and he says, "This place sucks." And then there's a Special Forces guy, or there's a U.S. Marine, and he's like, "I love it how much this place sucks." And then there's a Special Forces with a knife in his teeth, and he's like, "I wish it sucked more." And then there's the airport. There's an Air Force guy sitting on his couch with their TV remote, and he's like, "The cable TV's out. This place sucks." Yeah. And there's something to that. So as an Air Force guy, I do not understand life as a soldier. So can you take us through. The other thing is in the West, we see, Russia bombed Kiev, they killed 10 civilians. There's fighting in Bakhmut. We don't know what's happening or what, unless you're
Yes.
following closely on Telegram. What is it like? And there's different kinds of soldiers, right? There's infantry, there's special forces, there's artillery. There will be tankers hopefully soon. So I just want to hear from a soldier, what is it like to be a soldier in those type of combat
Well,
conditions?
what you've got in Ukraine is a full-scale conventional war. So you've got land and air forces combined in combined operations. You've got artillery. You do have tanks, but they don't have the Western tanks.
Right. The
T-72
T-72s.
mainly.
Yeah.
And they're all combined in operations at the moment in the east, in Donbass. And that part of the war has become quite static, predominantly because of the winter and also because of logistics. And those guys are, the infantrymen are living in trenches, living in bunkers, in the mud, in the cold, in the rain, with the temperature averaging about 8 to 10 below zero centigrade. They've got wet feet, and if they don't get those feet dry, their feet are going to start to go rotten, give them the most appalling pain, and they'll become casualties. The Ukrainians have got pretty good clothing and pretty good equipment because it's been supplied by the Western allies. They've got a sufficient amount of ammunition, but never enough. They're living in mud. They're eating food that gets carried up to them, and then they have to eat most of it cold unless they get in their bunkers, because any smoke that comes from their trenches are markers for artillery from the Russian side. Drone warfare is going on from both sides. So the second you move, you can be seen. The eyes are above you all the time, which is one of the most dangerous situations infantry have ever been in. The ground has always been a safe place, but now drones can fly over top and drop missiles straight down accurately into your trenches. So invisibility is absolutely vital. Infrared as well, infrared detectors can see you in the dark. So it's an appallingly difficult place to fight in for both sides. But the Ukrainians are better motivated because they're fighting for their land and their people, and they've got moral right on their side, and they've got the best equipment, and they're being resupplied constantly with newer, better, warmer, cleaner equipment, and they're managing to recycle their men. Living in cold, damp, wet climates for long periods of time, you don't sleep well, you lose weight, you get tired, you're constantly cold and shivering. If you're clever and you've got good friends, you cuddle up with them at night. You know, you don't sit separately. Say, well, men, we don't touch one another. Oh no, you get spooned up. You get spooned up with one another to stay warm. You share every biscuit you've got. You become very, very close to death. Is sitting on the wall all the time, waiting to launch itself against you. And so there's elements of fear, but that tends to fade with time and experience. And eventually, you get to the point where you just go, yeah, well, if I die, I die. And you accept that. It still doesn't make you stupid or foolish. But it means you don't worry about it anymore. And when you've got moral right and your country and your people and your lands and your homes, your families as in the background, then you're going to fight harder and longer. Whereas the Russians, they're invading another country, they're conscripts, they're people who have very often gone to war with a gun to their head, and they don't know why they're there. And so when they get cold and wet and miserable and hungry with the bad equipment that they have, they're not going. 5 of them aren't going to be worth 1 Ukrainian soldier. It's a tough place to be.
You mentioned you were a corporal, and you hear this a lot that and I've seen it in my own experience, but in the West we have the certain way of doing things. As an NCO in the British Army, you have some amount of authority and decision making, and in the Russian army, nobody has any decision making except for the general himself. Do you see that? Is that true? Is that an advantage that we have?
Yeah, and the Ukrainian army have been trained by the Americans, the British, the Israelis, Canadians over the last decade, and consequently, this system of delegating authority and allowing NCOs to take the initiative in a difficult situation and make decisions is one of the great strengths of Western armies. Whereas, as you say, the Russians don't have that. They're still operating the Soviet system where nobody dare make a mistake. So that every decision gets passed up the scale, and that
Right.
slows everything down.
Mhm.
And because everything slows down, they can't react quickly. They can't make decisions in time. And when they do make these decisions, they're the wrong ones because it's too late. Which is great. It was wonderful. The Ukrainians have got a wonderful saying about the Russians, you know, and that is, what is that? How do they say it? They say, we're very lucky because they are so stupid.
It's what a life. So this war has really become an artillery war, I think, the last few months. It's gone through different phases, but it seems like it's been, to one extent,
artillery and infantry, with most of the attacks being company or battalion size. So they're quite small. There's nothing of great strategic importance taking place at the moment. And I think that both sides are trying to create enough strength and concentrate their forces in one particular place at one particular time to gain a serious advantage when the weather warms up.
right.
At the moment, you've got the frozen ground, so it could be done now, but I don't think the logistics are sufficient for that to happen.
Yeah.
And then you're going to get the wet spring, and then you're going to get the dry summer. And by the dry summer as well, the training will have been done for the Leopard tanks, for the Abrams maybe, and for the Challenger 2s. And the logistics will have managed to accumulate enough material to carry out a major offensive. But I don't think it will be in the east. I think it will be in Crimea. I think they'll try to seal off Crimea first, seal off the Black Sea completely, which would free up the Ukrainian economy to transport their grain out across the Black Sea again, and then negotiate perhaps or renew their forces, and then go back and put Russia under pressure. And by that time, the sanctions that are in place will have bitten even more deeply into the Russian economy as well.
Yeah, that's an aspect of it that needs to that definitely needs to take effect. I wish we would give them the long range weapons to take down the Kursk bridge and the seal off the logistics on the east side of Crimea. We have that capability. We just haven't given it to the Ukrainians.
I was the first person to identify how the Kerch Bridge was actually blown.
Okay.
I watched the footage, and everybody was going, "Oh yeah, artillery, HIMARS, you know, and all these other ideas, bombing a truck." And I watched the footage, and I said, "No," I said, "I know a little bit about explosives."
Yeah.
And I said that this explosion has taken place under the bridge, on the surface of the water, using the water as a tamping process, so that the blast is reflected upwards, and
like
it
a
lifted,
mirror,
and it lifted the bridge, and the evidence was there. And about 2 weeks, I think about 10 days, 2 weeks later, I was proven right.
Wow.
You know? Yeah.
So that was a suicide bomb, you think?
No, it wasn't. No, it was a waterborne drone. It was an automated boat carrying explosives that was guided under the bridge, and boom, off it went. Yeah.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
So it wasn't a truck. It was a
no. It was a waterborne drone.
Right.
It was a large waterborne drone.
Yeah.
Basically, a small, a fairly medium-sized boat that sat just above the surface, that was remotely guided onto the target under the bridge, and then boom, exploded. The water creates a reflecting mechanism, so all the charge bounces off the water, goes up and lifts the bridge. They don't blow it to pieces.
Right.
It lifts it off its struts.
Right.
Which you can see the bridge had fallen to the side.
And then it falls down. Yeah.
Yeah. And by pure luck, there was a train up there at the same time, which damaged the railway line and caught the train on fire too.
Right.
Yeah.
I'd rather be lucky than good. That's what we used to say in the
it all comes in handy.
in the F-16.
Yeah.
So so there's this artillery war. So the infantry guy, the poor infantry guys, were just sitting there. They're shelling, and then occasionally there's an attack, and they're mustered together to go, attack.
Infantry warfare is poorly understood by the general public.
Yeah.
Because initially the Russians had the advantage of range on their artillery pieces. They were firing 152 artillery pieces, standard range, standard caliber of their guns. But when the Western Allies started sending 155s, they had a longer range.
Right.
So it took away the advantage. When you fire an artillery piece, radar automatically picks up where that missile has been fired from, and counter battery fire immediately gets fired back.
Right.
So as soon as you fire a weapon, you have to move your artillery piece.
Right.
Now, old-fashioned artillery pieces take time to move. They have to be picked up, stuck on the back of a vehicle, towed away.
Right.
Whereas things like HIMARS, they fire them, they drive. That's it.
Right.
2 minutes later, when the counter battery fire comes back in, they're gone.
Right.
And now the Ukrainian weapons outrange the Russian weapons. So wherever the Russians are, we can force you back. We can force you back.
Right.
The Russians are playing World War I, early World War II tactics. They're firing lots and lots of ammunition, which they're running out of.
Right.
And they're sending conscripts in as cannon fodder to basically suck up the enemy ammunition.
Right.
In the hope that the Ukrainians will run out of ammunition.
Right.
And through pure weight of numbers and attrition, that they will manage to take some of the ground. But the Russians, according to conservative figures right now, have lost around 125,000 men dead.
Yeah.
Now, if that's the death rates, you can say they're pushing close on 500,000 casualties so far.
That's more than what the U.S. lost in World War I.
Yeah, that's right.
And we only fought World War I for a few months. I mean, it's insane what they're doing. So, as a tanker, tank warfare is something that people don't understand. I certainly don't understand. So how does this work? You've got a couple of tanks. There's a tank, the platoon leader, they're all on radio. And then are they going to bomb other tanks? Are they going to take out are there infantry involved with the tanks? Like how would a tank battle look?
They've got several roles, all with in coordination with the other parts of the combined operations.
Combined
arms. So they work closely with the infantry.
Mm-hmm.
So they're there to defend and protect the infantry as they advance. But the infantry are also there to defend and protect them too against other infantry carrying shoulder weapons.
Right.
So they work very in close cooperation with one another. They also work in close cooperation with the air power that's from above. So they're sending messages to the jets that are flying above them to protect them, and also telling them where enemy positions are. Mm-hmm. They're also there to fight enemy tanks, to destroy enemy tanks, and to destroy enemy reinforced defense positions as well, so that the infantry can close in. They're also there to lay down covering fire. So there's an awful lot of things that tankers have to do. If you get a tank brigade or a tank division supported with all its support arms, then it's capable of penetrating enemy lines. And if you can look maybe 6 months into the future with Ukraine, I anticipate that the tanks, the modern tanks that are being sent, and in total, we're talking about possibly as many as 200 now from all the different countries that are donating, plus 100 T-72s from Morocco. So maybe.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
100 T-72s from Morocco.
Morocco, yeah.
Wow.
You've got the opportunity to form a tank division, and with that kind of strength concentrated, they could probably penetrate any Russian positions without too much trouble, and create and have a huge strategic benefit to Ukraine. Yeah.
Right. That's a hell of a unit with T-72s and Challengers and M1s and Leopards, and Yeah,
the problems with the different types of tanks are that you need different skills in terms of the maintenance and support. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the computer systems with the advanced tanks as well, which is why predominantly everybody wants the Leopard. Yeah. Because it is the best tank for the job. Right. And it also means that you've got a one system fits all for everybody to train. Yeah. So the Challengers, you can you can bring them along and maybe use them on the sideline. The Abrams again,
Right.
but it'll be the Leopards in numbers that will be the real penetration team for any tank operation.
Right.
Excuse me, I'm gonna cough.
Are when you shoot tanks have the big gun, and when they shoot their round, or when you shoot artillery, are these rounds guided, or are they just kind of gravity? We call them dumb bombs in the Air Force. They just hit where they hit.
No, they're all sorts of different ammunitions for different targets and different reasons. And I'm not a tanker,
Yeah.
from fear of making a mistake, but they can basically lock onto the target. So fire and forget.
Yeah.
But once you've locked onto your target, you fire your gun and you keep driving, you keep moving, and
Right.
that missile is going to find that target.
Right.
And it's going to hit it. Yeah. And the T-72s and their ammunition doesn't have the power to penetrate Western advanced armor either.
I think in Desert Storm and in our battles in Iraq, I think our M1 was undefeated, or I think like a couple of them lost a tread or something like that, but it was like 100-1 or something. There was some crazy ratio, but
yeah, I mean they were completely outclassed,
right.
outnumbered, outmaneuvered, outgeneraled, and outfought.
Right.
It wasn't a walkover by any means, but it was a guaranteed victory.
Right. The Javelin, we gave the Ukrainians a Javelin, and there's jokes about it's the tank throwing competition, the turret throwing competition, because they're just popping the T-72s. Does Russia have a similar weapon now that we're bringing in?
Yeah, it has a shoulder-fired weapon, but it's nowhere near as accurate or effective as the Laws or the Javelin.
Right.
The Laws on Javelin are fire and forget, the Milan as well, fire and forget, or I think the Javelin is an upgraded Milan. But it's fire and forget.
Mm-hmm.
Put the crosshairs on the target, bleep, fire, and away it goes. And you get up and run.
Right.
So they're nowhere near as accurate and advanced as ours. And the other thing is that the advanced armor that is on the Western tanks gives an immense amount of protection to the men inside.
Right.
The design of the tanks is better because the automatic firing and the ammunition is stored behind the turret, whereas the Russian tanks, it's stored around the circuit of the turret, which means as soon as you get an explosion on the inside, that's what lifts the turret up and kills everybody inside. Yeah.
How about armored personnel carriers? There's been a lot of those were kind of the first things that we sent. Are those useful? I mean, I'm sure they're useful, but
you have to keep up with fast moving tanks. You have to have mechanized infantry.
Right.
So the infantry have to be in vehicles to keep up with the tanks. Otherwise, there's no point.
Right.
And then once the battle grinds to a halt, and the tanks have either penetrated, then the infantry have to get out and do their role. Yeah. Otherwise, they just couldn't keep up in the first place.
Right.
So the armored personnel carriers are various, but the Russians are still using BDMs, which are left over from the 1960s and 70s. That's the quality of material they've got.
Right.
I mean, it's a bit like if you got a mobile telephone from the 1970s, you're talking about something the size of a walkie-talkie from World War II.
Right.
And that's the equivalent that they're using in comparison to a modern cell phone.
Right. Well, thankfully, the details of the military, the experience of the soldiers, the equipment of soldiers is interesting to me because this is a military problem and it requires a military solution. There's not going to be a diplomatic solution to Ukraine. Either Russia wins and they own Ukraine, or we win and Russia's gone. Those are the two. I think those are the two outcomes.
I think there has to be some kind of diplomatic solution in the end. But first there has to be a military victory. Because Putin, being a dictator and a tyrant, he's got enemies everywhere at home. So he can't resign. He can't slide into the dark or make a negotiated settlement because that means he's going to die.
Right.
So he has to stay in the fight until somebody on his own side kills him.
Right.
Until there's a complete military failure.
Right.
Either way, he's got to stay in the fight. And the Ukrainians know that everything that as soon as Putin opens his mouth, whatever noise comes out is a lie.
Right.
And so consequently, there's nothing he can say that's of any diplomatic value at the moment. It's only when Putin realizes that he's actually lost and he has no other stones to turn over,
Right.
that he will actually start to negotiate. And at that time, he becomes weak in the eyes of his own people, and somebody will eventually have the courage. One of the oligarchs that he hasn't murdered yet will find a way to get to him. Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting end. The big fear of the West is that it turns into a nuclear war, which of course we have to avoid. Of course you can't, there's no circumstance that you would want that to happen. I just don't think it's going to happen. It's not in Russia's interest. It's not in anybody's interest.
No.
Yeah.
What you're doing is, I mean, every country has its lunatics.
Yeah.
We all have them, and they all say stupid things.
Yeah.
In government, and in order to make a name for themselves.
Right.
We should do this. We should bomb them. We should whatever. But ultimately, when it comes down to actually making that decision, the generals, the military leaders sitting around the table are going to be saying, well, if we make this decision, I'll be dead within a few hours, and so will all my family, my wife, my children, my grandchildren.
Right.
They'll all be dead,
right.
and we won't achieve a damn thing because of it.
Right.
And so you're basically saying, come on, guys, let's all commit suicide. No, not a good idea.
Right. There are lots of reasonable people in Russia. I've met lots of them. Unfortunately, the problem I have with Russians is that they allow these dictators to rule them. You know, like, I don't think English people would not want to be slaves. Americans would not tolerate being a slave, you know, and there's something about their culture.
We like to think so.
Yeah.
Because we've never been there.
Yeah.
But in the past, we've been slaves to our autocrats, to our kleptocrats, to our business owners, to the people running our factories, to criminal law leaders in our own states. You know, I'm not so sure that, you know, that put in those same circumstances where everybody in power is watching you, telling you what to do, and if you don't do as they say, they're going to lock you up in a nasty prison for the rest of your life, and or even worse, punish or kill your family.
Yeah,
you know, that's the power they have.
Yeah.
Would we be any different? I don't think so. I think that, you know, we're very much the same as them, but they live in a country where all resistance has been crushed again. Yeah.
There's a lot, you know, China, there's Middle Eastern countries, there's a lot of countries like that, which is why you don't want to let yourself get in that situation. You want to avoid it before it happens, because once it happens, it's really hard to undo.
And when you've got a gun to your head, you're going to make the vote that they give you.
Yeah, exactly. I know. And so it's better off avoiding that. And then when those situations fall, when those dictators fall, it's usually pretty ugly. So
yeah, because the people with the courage or the fortitude to take them on are monsters of a different kind. And then you've got to try and create a situation where the clever people, the diplomats, the politicians that we all despise and hate, get back into the situation of actually running a stable and united economy and country. And freedom always has to be fought for. It doesn't just exist because it's there. It's been fought for in the past. The Ukrainians are fighting for it now, and because they're fighting for it, hopefully we won't have to fight for it again in Europe, at least. But you know, it's something that always has to be fought for. It's not. We shouldn't ever take it for granted.
I was having a debate. A lot of Republicans in this country are saying we're sending $10 billion or $100 billion. I can't believe it. And I'm like, folks, the Ukrainians are dying.
Yeah.
Like, they're actually fighting for freedom. They're the only country I know today that's actually fighting for freedom. And what a small investment. If we can send $100 billion and gain freedom in Europe, that's a small fraction of 1 year of our defense budget. So the
problem with democratic governments again, and the fact that everything that is said is on social media within 30 seconds and national media 30 seconds later, is the extremists get all the airtime.
Yeah.
The extremists sell all the product. The extremists get all the clicks on YouTube and so on. It's not the moderates that are in the middle doing the real governing that get to be heard about. Right. And even in even in your Republican Party at the moment, the vast majority of them have come out quite bravely and supported the donations and the equipment going to Ukraine. But all we hear about is the small number of lunatics that are sitting on the edge but getting all the news.
Right. This is my passion. This is about life on Earth. If you can bring some type of moderates together, that's the way to govern, not with the extremists. But they get all the clicks on Twitter and stuff. So they're the ones that
they sell all the product.
Yeah.
So if you're sensationalizing and frightening people, it's the base emotions of people that make them pay attention. Oh my God, I'm scared. Somebody's going to steal something from me, or I can get something cheap, or somebody's just said something about somebody I don't like and I want to hear about it.
Right.
You know, and it's an outrageous lie, but I still want to hear about it.
Right.
About somebody I don't like. And so social media and national media is full of that all the time. And you don't seem to have a dominant moderate media at the moment, which is we're fortunate. We've got national. We've got the BBC, for example, that tries to hold on to some kind of objectivity. But you've got this polarity in the United States that skews the news and takes the voice away from all the vast majority of really good, educated, intelligent people that exist in your nation.
Yeah. You just nailed it, Robin. BBC is I listen to a lot of different news. I listen to Left Wing, I listen to Fox, just to see what different people are saying. But the BBC, I think, is one of the best. What do you think about the Telegraph or the Guardian? The Telegraph has a great Ukraine podcast. Do you listen to that?
Yeah, I do. I spend about 2 hours a day going through even the people I hate. I recently got asked to speak on Fox, and I turned them down. I said I wouldn't speak for a media outlet that encouraged an attempted coup on the United States of America. I turned them down. I said I wouldn't associate with you in any shape or form. But I still listen to them. I still watch the lunatics like Hannity and
Tucker Carlson.
And they say they're only actors, but they're propagandists, and they work for Rupert Murdoch. Another story. But I listen to it. I watch it. I go through their nonsense, and I try to get from both sides, the left and the right, and come to some kind of sensible, objective opinion that I can actually write about with some kind of reasonable foundations. Because both extremes at both ends are in the same place.
Yeah.
You know, they're both
in a circle. They end up coming back together. Yeah.
Oh yeah. If you go far enough left or far enough right, you'll meet in the middle. You know. They're all in the crazy farm. There's no doubt about it. But they dominate the media.
Yeah.
And even the British newspapers like the Telegraph and the Guardian have swung in this kind of polarized way to the point where they're only putting across one point of view, and they're not even interested in what the other people have said. And occasionally those other people have a point of view too.
Yeah.
They might just bring up something that you haven't heard about, that you don't know about.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm by no means an authority, but at least I'm a reasonable voice stuck in the middle there somewhere.
Right.
And a lot of people like that. There's an awful lot of people that would like it if somebody in the USA actually said, I think PBS do it, don't they?
But they have an audience.
Yeah.
NPR is the radio, public radio. And I've done some interviews with them. They're really good usually. Yeah. They're liberal, to be honest, but they report the news well, I think.
I mean, you've got a different perspective. You've got a different meaning about liberal in the USA to the one we have over here.
Yeah.
I consider myself to be a liberal humanitarian.
Right.
And I divide very, very, very huge divide between socialism and communism as well. So I think those words mean different things in the USA to the way they do in Europe.
Socialism is fingernails on a chalkboard to Republicans. It's so funny. They're like, oh my God, he's a socialist. And I'm like, first of all, have you ever been to Norway? It's not that bad of a place to live. Yeah. And B, we have Social Security, we have Medicare, we have public schools, we have we are a socialist country. We're just a different place of this on the spectrum of it. So yeah, people don't necessarily understand. They have ideology, but sometimes they don't know why.
I was talking to a very good friend of mine in New York a couple of weeks ago on this particular subject, and we started off with a disagreement because of this strange use of the same words, different meanings.
Yeah.
And I said, well, if you go to work and you earn your money and you come home and your family are there, you spread that wealth amongst your family. But if your grown-up children have a family as well and they're in trouble, you spread that wealth to them to help them out as well.
Right.
And then, maybe even to your brothers and sisters who have got their families. So, I mean,
That's communism.
That's a form of socialism.
Right.
Because you're sharing the wealth
Right.
that you actually have at this time in the hope that when your kids get a bit older and they're a bit wealthier, then you're old and frail and you can't even cut the wood, but they're going to come around and cut the wood for you. That's socialism in my brain. Communism, totally different story, because communism, Stalinism is so closely associated, with autocracies and dictators and massive gulags with millions of people murdered and so on. That's the communism of the 20th century.
Right.
They're totally different things. Yeah.
They're very different things. And I definitely consider myself a liberal Democrat, in that liberal views like human rights, democracy, that's the traditional use of the word liberal. What in America, when you say liberal, it means like woke, quote unquote, or people like equity. Left. We have this word equity. It's the new buzzword, and it doesn't mean equality.
No,
it means equality of outcomes, which is very wrong.
I listen to Jordan Peterson as well.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's the Ronald Reagan description of that is everybody's equally miserable. So
equity is we're seeing the worst sides of it in Canada.
Yeah.
Whereas quality of outcome. So it doesn't matter how bad you are.
Right.
If you've got ginger hair and everybody else has got blonde hair, then there's got to be an equal number of ginger people. I'm using hair as to avoid any racist
exactly.
Elements. But that kind of or gender situations where I've got to have the same number of people in this particular group at the end of an examination process, which qualifies somebody for a role in life. Well, that to me is complete insanity. Everybody should have the equality of opportunity, the equal opportunity to take the test, to take the course, to take the exam. But the outcome depends on your ability to pass the tests. Yeah.
Amen. And that's the definition of America. Like in old Europe, it was aristocracy. It was how you were born. And the definition of America is everybody has equal opportunity, and I don't think we're losing it, but some people want us to lose that. And so we need to make sure that does not happen. Well, is there anything else? The final thing I want to make sure we talk about, you have some books out, you do speaking, can you talk about those things?
I take a lot of my life experiences and I entertain people with public speaking, but I also go into schools and talk to children about dealing with adversity, dealing with bullying, also bullying in the workplace. I talk about PTSD. I can take the same life format and direct it at many of the experience I've had to speak about for an audience. And I speak in colleges, in schools, in corporations, and I have a fair amount of success. We were closed down for 2 years because of COVID.
I know. I hated that.
Getting the circuit going again.
Yeah.
I've written 5 books. My life story up to the age of 45 is Fighting Scared, which is available on Amazon or available on my website, which is robinhorsfall.com. And I wrote the Wise Old Paratrooper trilogy, which are little collections of short stories and maxims and some poems. And recently I published Warrior Poet Soldier Songs, which in paperback and in audio. And that's 50 of my poems that cover all sorts of aspects like war, suicide, love, joy, parenthood, and all the different feelings and emotions that we have to experience in life. And I'm hoping to write a novel this year. I'm writing a thesis on bullying, which a great part of my childhood was dominated by being a victim of bullying, being an isolated kid. Yeah, I've got a hell of a lot I want to do. Lots and lots of plans for this year. If my health manages to stay up for it. I can't leap over tall buildings with a single bound anymore, or swing through windows, but my fingers can write and my voice can convey information to other people. And I hope to keep doing that. Yeah.
Robin, you're an amazing human being. I love your wisdom. I love your passion. You're like an example of what especially young men should look up to you. And I wish our politicians, I think they are. I think they will. I'm optimistic, but I think your political wisdom also can help us get through this evil authoritarian dictator that is attacking Europe today. You know what? Today, hundreds of Ukrainians, or tens, if not hundreds, are going to die. Yeah. And we need to get off our ass, for lack of a better term, and get our support. It's a year into the war. They don't have Patriot missiles yet. So yeah, we need to get this stuff moving so that we can return sanity and freedom to Europe, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think we are doing that. And I think there's a lot of good people out there trying to. It just takes time with democracies. It just takes time.
The problem with time, we can say that, and that just means lives. It just means Ukrainian lives.
Yeah.
So
it's the price we pay for our freedoms.
And we need to have our freedom, and we need to have our process. I agree.
Yeah.
But your work on LinkedIn for sure is swaying my hearts and minds for sure. Mine, it did. And so I encourage people to go to your website, robinhorsfall.com, and check out your books and hire you to go be a speaker. I think there's amazing amount of wisdom there to gain.
Yeah, I'd love to come back to the States one day.
Yeah. Come on over. It's open now. We're post-COVID, so
Yep.
Okay. Well, thanks again. If you love the podcast, please subscribe and give us a rating for Down to Earth with Terry Virts.